Hello and welcome to another deck guide. Today I'm going to be talking about the new Bald Eagle deck that I built with G'day Maverick and took to a second place finish in the first ever Giantslayer event. G'day Maverick also took this deck to a rank 1 master in NA, and Casanova played this deck to a 7 win streak in the new Gauntlet format. Remember, if you want to see more deck guides and other LOR content, then don't forget to like and subscribe as it really helps me out a lot. Today, I'm going to be discussing the individual cards of the deck, a Mulligan strategy, a matchup table, and general gameplay guide. Let's get into it. The deck's namesake is the Bald Braum and the Eagle, i.e. Anivia. They can both become win conditions in their own right, but generally Anivia is your go-to in order to end the game. Often versus aggro decks, Braum can just come down and become this wall that they just can't beat, and eventually it levels up and just creates too many blockers for them to deal with, so don't forget about that too. The buffs to both Braum and Anivia allow the deck to function much faster than it ever really could before. Obviously the buff to Braum is huge because it gives you a 4 mana 1/5 challenger regen and 3/3 overwhelm just with that one card that can also become bigger and bigger. Because of that, you don't even really care if Braum dies, you can just play another one. It gives you so much value, so much blocking potential. The Anivia buff, it provides actually a lot. I didn't originally think it would be very powerful, but curving out Anivia into attack into turn 7 Rekindler is really powerful, and people don't often expect it. You get out Anivias really quickly this way. It also allows you to play a turn 10 Anivia plus Vengeance or other combos. The extra 1 mana really does help you with the deck. I was quite surprised by how good it was. Other than that, the additional win conditions in the deck are the 3 Rekindlers and the Chronicler. These just allow you to play more Anivias because that's how you win the game in the end. You don't really need anything more than this because a control deck is designed to control the game, and then eventually it will draw its win conditions and win that way, but you actually win the game from controlling the board. If you play too many win conditions in a control deck, you often will find they clog up your hand and you don't need them. You're better off having all the control cards and eventually drawing your win conditions than the other way around. The rest of the deck can be separated into value, healing, and tricks. When it comes to value, we've got Omen Hawk, Avarosian Sentry, and Glimpse Beyond. These cards enable us to make big 2-for-1 trades. They're also really good at fighting the board early. Obviously, Omen Hawk and Avarosian Sentry, they're early game plays. Omen Hawk especially lets you trade up really hard because you can buff really important cards such as Braum or even Kindly Tavern Keeper. These let you block multiple things or kill multiple things for one card while curving out. It's really great. And the Avarosian Sentry, also that can get buffed as a 3/2. Avarosian Sentry as a 3/2 is really powerful. It lets you block and draw a card which gets you closer to your control finishes. So they're both just really good at delaying the game and making you get further into your win conditions. This deck runs a lot of healing, 30 healing to be exact. It's more than almost any other deck I've played in this game, and it basically means that most aggro decks just can never get there against you because a lot of burn decks play about 30 damage worth of cards, right? They can hit you, but you normally have blockers and it's their reach that gets them there. But when you have 30 healing, they just can't make it. They can't do the maths. Normally you're going to be able to play about 10 to 15 healing in a game against burn, and that is just far too much for them to ever be able to handle, especially while your healing is also often removal. Fury of the North is just a crazy card, and I find it really hard to justify not playing it in any Freljord deck that I run. In this deck, it's really good at protecting Anivia Egg. It's weird, but it works. Like, no one ever expects you to protect the Anivia Egg, but it's our win condition. We have to have it alive at all times, right? It's also really great at letting Braum trade up, kill something, and just in general, there's a lot of overwhelm units at the moment that are causing a lot of problems and doing damage that you just have to kill. And you have to not take damage from them at the same time. So it lets you maybe not die to a Darius. It also lets you trade up with Vi. There's so many uses for this card, it's actually insane. So it's just always worth running. I like it as a 2-off because otherwise you might get a bit clogged up with them. And you just don't need more than that. You just need to use it once in a game to win. The box is a new addition to Shadow Isle Control decks that I've been playing recently. And it's actually just been insane as a card. Because if you actually think about the two main decks that people are playing, it's Heimerdinger and it's Noxus decks, right? So Noxus aggro decks, they run the Crimson Disciple, and they go for the combo where they play Crimson Disciple into Demolitionist, right? That combo just gets absolutely blown out by the box. And the same with Heimerdinger. They play Heimerdinger, then they play like 2 spells and attack you. Well, great. You've just got the most insane value box ever. And people, even if people play around it, they're still playing much slower in order to not be blown out by this card. And that just gives you time. That just makes you get to your late game safer. So this being in the deck is a great inclusion at the moment. I'd definitely recommend it. Vengeance and Ruination are just your standard Shadow Isles control tools that have been around forever. There are a lot of decks that can't afford not to develop after turn 6 and 7 against Shadow Isles control, otherwise they will just never be able to kill you. And if they do develop, then you have the Ruination to finish them off. Vengeance in particular is also really good at the moment because it kills things like Vi, Heimerdinger, it kills Darius. It just kills a lot of problem cards that, or even cards that get buffed up by Fury of the North or something like that. It's very flexible at the moment, and the cost doesn't matter so much when when the value that you provide with the infinite Anivias is so high, it just doesn't really matter. Let's get into a mulligan guide. Luckily, your mulligans in this deck are actually pretty simple, and you can group them into either versus aggression or versus control. And even then, they're still pretty similar. So, against aggression, you really want to be keeping your early game cards such as Braum, Omen Hawk, Sentry, and like Tavern Keeper, things like that. Realistically, the deck is built to beat aggro anyway. You have so much healing and so much early game and so much removal, right? So you just want to draw most of that. There aren't that many cards you'd want to mulligan away. So you want to get rid of Anivia. You want to get rid of like Vengeance. Sometimes, depending on the matchup, you want to get rid of Withering Wail and Grasp, but you might also want to keep them sometimes. It depends on what you're playing against. But what you're really looking for is the early game, like the 1 and 2 drops, the Vile Feast, the Omen Hawks. Against decks that you want to trade up a lot, such as like Mono Nox, Fury is a really good keep. It's just really disruptive. It lets you block something, kill something, and then keep the thing on board. And the box, obviously, it's great against certain aggro decks. Aggro decks that want to play lots of things on one turn. So, like Bilgewater likes to play lots of things on one turn. So does Nox sometimes, but sometimes there's better keeps. So you would consider the box against Nox. Against control, it's quite a similar keep. You're still looking at keeping your Omen Hawk and your Sentry, but this time you're really looking at keeping Glimpse Beyond and Anivia. Anivia is your main win condition, and sometimes you can just draw it too late against control. You really want to be slapping it down like turn 6 to 8 to get the death trigger so that you can start playing Rekindlers. Glimpse Beyond just lets you draw more cards, and it's quite disruptive. If someone uses a removal spell on something, especially Anivia, sometimes people will Anivia, and they have no mana left, and you can just glimpse it for free, and it will come back alive, and you draw 2 cards, and they waste their will. It's great. Sometimes it's worth keeping Braum, because A, it makes people want to Will of Ionia it, and if they're Will of Ioning your Braum, then you get to play Anivia free, right? It's also just a good target to kill things. Like against Weimar, for instance, Braum kills turrets and threatens Heimerdinger. It's really good there. And Vile Feast also sometimes can be kept because it's really disruptive. It can mess with shields, it can mess with combat maths, and it can kill important 1 health things like turrets again. Let's get into a matchup guide. Against Weimar, Bald Eagle was realistically built to be able to beat aggro while at the same time being able to at least pressure Weimar. Weimar is probably the most popular deck on ladder right now, and it's so disruptive and annoying to play against. I didn't want to play a Shadow Isles control deck that had no chance of beating it, but luckily, Bald Eagle really does have a good chance. First of all, it plays the box, Withering Wail, and Anivia. These 3 cards absolutely annihilate Heimerdinger turrets, and that's the main way you want to win this game. You just stop him from playing Heimerdinger, or you stop his Heimerdinger pressure straight away. All of these cards destroy the turrets, allow you to survive until about turn 8 to 9, which is when you start swinging around the pressure. The goal of the matchup is generally to survive their really powerful turn 5 to 7. So as long as you prepare and allow yourself to survive those turns, generally you're going to win. By preparation, what I mean is have 8 mana on turn 5 to enable you to play things like the box or Vengeance or Withering Wail. Have Vengeance available, have Ruination available, anything to just make you survive those few turns until you can get Anivia out safely and start attacking with it. As soon as Anivia starts coming out safely and attacking, then realistically the Heimerdinger the pressure just goes away, and it's only really Vi that you have to worry about, and Vi is much less scary than Heimerdinger. You also have a lot of healing to deal with their burn, because Heimerdinger decks generally try and pressure you with elusive turrets and then finish you off with burn. But because you have so much healing, they actually have to keep the board control quite high. And because you have so much disruption for the board, they can't do that. And the idea is that you'll just slowly whittle away. Obviously, sometimes you lose. It's about a 50-50 matchup, but that's the idea on how you play the game. Mono Nox is the new aggro deck on the block. It plays big overwhelm units, then tries to attack, deal a bit of extra damage, and then finish you off with burns such as Noxus Fervor and Decimate. Luckily, as I said, the deck's basically built to deal with this. It plays Braum, and it plays Fury of the North, and it plays Removal, and it plays Healing. So as long as you survive their like turn 1 to 4 by playing anything at all really, and healing up a bit, you should be fine, because once Braum comes down, it's really hard for them to deal with it, especially if you have a Fury of the North in hand. You can use Fury to trade up with Overwhelm or take less damage from Overwhelm, and then you can use your healing to put yourself up to a point where they just can't ever finish you. Don't be afraid to use your Withering Wails early, because as soon as they start playing Crimson Disciples, it's really hard to actually resolve that card without taking damage. It is an important card in the deck, but Crimson Disciple kind of counters it, so be aware that Crimson Disciple is the main way you lose. With that in mind, Grasp is really good, or even Vengeance sometimes, or the box. Because of Crimson Disciple, Anivia becomes less good against this deck. Realistically, you're just going to win this game by playing healing cards and outlasting them, because Mono Nox runs out of steam really quickly. So just be prepared to kill their stuff, heal up, and eventually you'll just win because they won't have any cards in hand. Scouts is a really similar matchup to Mono Nox, except they kill you slower and they have no reach at all. So it means that they have to develop turn 5, 6, 7. They have to keep playing things, and that's when you can really abuse them with things like Ruination or board wipes with even Anivia plus Withering Wail. Realistically, this matchup is super favoured for you, and a lot would have to go wrong for this to end. Braum is really good against it as well, because they have to do damage to Braum. They can't really avoid that, so you often do level it up. The main way that this deck can beat you is with leveling their champions, which are very powerful once leveled, or Cythria making it so that you can't block anything. To counter that, just make sure you have removal for those cards. Their other cards are pretty meaningless, that you don't have to worry about them that much. They're not going to kill you. Play around Relentless Pursuit, so make sure you're not dead to 2 attacks, and then kill their big threats, and other than that, just heal up and you should be fine. The Bald Eagle Mirror is such a weird matchup, I find it hard to even talk about. Realistically, the only thing that's important in this matchup is who gets out more Anivias early. The point at which you win this matchup is when you kill all your opponent's Anivias and yours are still alive. There's a few ways that you do this. You can have 4 Anivias attack, and that will just kill them. Or you can attack with 3 Anivias and use Withering Wail. Now, one thing I want to note that's extremely important with this is that if you attack with 3 Anivias, don't use the Withering Wail on your attack. Wait until he blocks, which they always do because they're going to lose their Anivias anyway. They might as well not take an extra 9 damage. Wait until they block, then use Withering Wail. What that does is it puts the Anivia spells on the stack when you attack, and then makes the Withering Wail resolve first. And what this means is all the Anivias will go to 4 health, then they'll take 4 damage, and then the last Anivia Glacial Strike, or whatever it's called, will kill the eggs. If you do it the wrong way round, then you'll do 6 damage to the board, meaning that the egg will come out, and then you'll do the Withering Wail and only do 1 damage to the egg. So getting the stack ordered correctly is really important here. Other than that, you can also attack with 3 Anivias and then Ruination, and then hope that he doesn't have a way to kill your Anivia eggs. Some people play Bald Eagle with more Chroniclers or with the Harrowing. Those decks realistically are going to be really hard for you to beat because they're just going to have more Anivias than you. But we're not really building the deck at the moment to beat the Mirror. We're building it to beat everything else. But as I said, if you understand these tips that I've just said, you should be fine. Other than that, there's not that many decks going around that at the moment. You know, there's like Mono Bilgewater, which is just another aggro deck. Like I said, you just heal and you kill their stuff. They don't really have anything threatening for you because they play Sejuani, and Sejuani does nothing against you at all. So they're just wasting mana and cards playing it, really. There's also like Karina. Karina's kind of hard, but it's actually quite a fun matchup because it's about a 50-50. If you just heal after the first Ledros and then get out a bunch of Anivias, you should win. you do have enough healing to survive for quite a long time, and they are forced to use their removal to kill your Anivias a lot of the time. With that in mind, it's all about what happens turn 9, 10, and 11. Sometimes they can just play 2 Ledrosses and a few burn spells, and you can't do anything about it, and sometimes you can out-heal them and slowly whip them down with Anivia. It's quite a fun matchup, and I think it's probably slightly favoured for them. And there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed this guide on Bald Eagle. It's one of my favourite decks I think I've ever built. I love that it can beat control and aggro. There's not a lot of decks that can do that. If you've enjoyed the video, please don't forget, once again, to like and subscribe. It really helps me to continue growing, and it really helps me to show other people this content. As the more subscriptions I get, the more likes I get, the more this will be shown to other people. So thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.